Вот так вот. Блин, зачем я закрыл вкладку? Ну ладно. Ох, что-то громко-то. Так, реплик. Вопрос. Нужно ли возрождать сервер по Майнкрафту? Ну ты бы там стал играть или нет? Я беру плеер, и то инвалид. Ну да. Java или Bedrock? Java. Java Edition. Ну тогда вопрос закрыт. Ну получается тогда вопрос закрыт. Ух ты ж. Сколько смайлов-то. Привет, Ник. Спасибо за поздравление. Я так нервничал перед этим зачетом, особенно в субботу. А в итоге сдал, успешно сдал. Я очень рад. Устал? Да, очень устал. Поэтому, когда я пришел домой, я еще поспал. 2 часика. Вот сейчас проснулся недавно и... Ну, квас попил и сел стримить. И сегодня 15 стен от краски очищаем шпателем. Ну вот. Я заставил кого-то сильно за меня волноваться. Это нехорошо. А с другой стороны, все закончилось хорошо. И завтра еще один зачет. Но там у меня уже оценка должна быть. Потому что там у нас предмет был разбит на 3 подпредмета. Вот. И я по всем 3 подпредметам хорошо поработал в течение семестра. В пятницу должен быть еще один зачет. Но там тоже, скорее всего, проблем быть не должно. Следующая проблема 14 числа. Экзамен по криптографии. Собрал, как вы говорите, сколько предметов должен получить автомат. Ну что-то типа того. Вот 14 числа криптография, экзамен. А 20 либо 20 либо 21 машинного обучения. Машинное обучение, да. Так. Чем вообще я хотел сегодня заняться? Во-первых, поступило предложение возродить Майнкрафт сервер. Вот у нас сейчас как раз набралось человек, я хотел спросить, стоит ли это делать? Будете ли вы иногда заходить? Проблема в том, что сервер на Атерносе. Вот. Еще я думаю, может быть, сегодня Metal Gear Solid на стриме начать. Или может Warframe. Либо у меня есть еще одно занятие. Мне тут скинули одну картиночку. Скинули картиночку, как выглядит кастомизированный чат. И я хочу попробовать кастомизировать чат самостоятельно. Потому что я научусь, как это делать. Раз. Я смогу кастомизировать свой чат. 2. И я смогу оказывать услуги по кастомизированию чата другим ютуберам. 3. Хотя, а знаете, пожалуй, стоит сегодня... Возможно, стоит сегодня закончить пончик, который мы начинали делать когда-то. Ну, я же на одном из стримов обучался 3D-моделированию. Вот. Ну, мы вместе обучались, потому что вы смотрели за мной, я смотрел за видео. Вот. И мы собрали уже какую-то начальную версию пончика. И мы подумали... Я запутался. Это мы вас обучали. Меня обучало видео, а я обучал вас. С глазурью или без? Но вот мы как раз закончили на том, что сделали глазурь. Насколько я помню. Надо сейчас посмотреть. Мы закончили на 6-м уроке рендеринге. И нам остается еще... И нам остается еще 10 уроков для завершения пончика. Так что можно сегодня как раз вечером потратить на это часа 2-3. Да. Моя шея и спина немножко еще не отошли от этих дней подготовки к зачету. Потому что я все за компьютером сидел, учил. О, вижу, Сэндон сделал опрос. Делаем сервер по Майнкрафту или не делаем? Ну давайте тогда голосуйте. Я голосовать не буду, потому что я не знаю. С одной стороны, дело хорошее, а с другой стороны, его нужно будет включать вручную. Каждый раз, когда кто-нибудь захочет поиграть. Вот. Ну и надо на нем строить там спавн. А я не умею придумывать красивые здания в Майнкрафте. Поэтому да. Не, ну так-то на прошлом сервере хорошо было. К нам приходили всякие там, даже в туберы приходили, строились. Вот у нас там в подвале кролик жил. Ну хорошо. Тогда я сейчас сделаю вот так. Вот так. Нет, не вот так, а вот. Переключимся на 7-й урок. О, это видео. А теперь вот так. А где я? Алло. Во. Я только сейчас понял, как изменить запрет на ссылки автомод. Короче говоря, запрет на ссылки снять можно. А вот на автомод лучше не отключать. Потому что иногда он бывает нужен. Так, вот вам видно окно. Правда, окно с видео немножко перекрывает окно с проектом, который мне, кстати, надо открыть. Donut. А вот он как у нас выглядел.
Got ahead of myself. Sorry to excite you.
Надо, наверное, вот так сделать. О, идеалочно.
Texturing and shading comes first because it is much more essential. In this case, for example, our donut, we've just got solid colors, and that's okay for our icing, but our donut base here is a solid, almost canary yellow. That's definitely the wrong shade of donut. Real donuts, bringing up some reference photos.
Ну да, текста почти не видно.
Software here, I haven't mentioned it, PureRef. It's what all 3D artists use to manage reference. You can just like paste in images from the internet and then just create like a canvas and then like rearrange things, and it's really, really fantastic. But anyways, I've just got two photos here. Real donuts, they're not just one solid color. Right?
Ну да, настоящие пончики ни одного цвета.
But the modeling part, right, where we've created that part that like indents it. Because of the way donuts are cooked, you have some parts that are going to receive less hot fat that it's sitting in when it's cooking. So this middle part, and it's most visible here, can often be lighter than the rest.
Вот вы замечали, что средняя часть пончика светлее.
It's also got, you know, light patches, brown patches.
А зачем двойные пончики? И что вообще такое двойные пончики?
And you might not think you would see it. You know, if you were to do a render up here, you really wouldn't. But we're going to have our donut spinning around on a turntable. So we do need to see it because we're going to see the backside of it. So it's just a great opportunity to just learn about textures and shaders.
Так, текстурирование.
So we don't need our icing, so I'm going to hide that just by hitting H, or I think I mentioned this before, but you can also do it up here in the outliner, just clicking the little eye there. We'll just hide it. Hotkey to bring
Так, прячем глазурь.
Sorry, the little eye disabled. It's Alt H. So hide with H, or Alt H to bring it back. Anyways, okay. So this is our donut here. Okay. Now we spoke a little bit about the materials over here. I mean, really all we changed was just the base color.
В смысле двойной? Двойной, не знаю, в высоту, в ширину, в толщину. В чем он двойной?
Subsurface scattering for the icing, and we also used the roughness down here. I would say, by the way, that like, you know, all these values here, they're like confusing, and a lot of artists can like get really into the weeds with it. Like if you just stick to the base color, the roughness value, and then the normal map, which we'll get to in a bit for bump mapping, that's really like 90% of the materials you make will use just those three things: base color, roughness, and normal mapping. But anyway,
координатах.
now this material.
В смысле? Типа обычный пончик в евклидовых координатах, а двойной пончик в радиальных координатах.
Here that we've got here, you can see if you wanted to add in image textures and like combine things and whatever, this thing would get very bloated and very like annoying and frustrating to use. And actually, the old version of Blender, like 2.49, which was like 10 years ago, you had to do everything in this sort of this view here. Thankfully, we don't have to do that anymore. There is a node editor, which you can access by hitting the shader tab at the top of your window there. That'll take you to the shader workspace, which will load up all these extra windows and things. I think mine is set to solid view shading by default, but yours is probably this one. But yeah, it's loaded up a bunch of extra windows here. I actually don't need them on
Первых
the
по одним,
left-hand side. I
потом по
need them
другим.
here. So I'm actually going to click and drag across to merge them. So top left-hand corner of any like sub window, and then you click and drag across, and then you can merge, or you can just right-click on the area and say join areas, and then just merge it across. So all I'm looking for is my model at the top here, and then at the bottom here.
Ну, то есть это просто потолще пончик. Я правильно понял? Поэтому он двойной.
Whatever, this long list of settings, let's call it. This resembles.
Мы здесь все равно начинки не увидим. Она внутри.
So this material panel here is really just a way to, like, if you need simple changes, like, you know, you're just adding in an object, you know, and then, I just want that object to be, red or something. I can do it over here very quickly. But if I want to do texturing and combine things and do like interesting things with the material, that's when you want to switch to the shader.
Вам видос нормально слышно?
You can add extra nodes and extra things, and it gets really interesting. And you can do it all here. So the way that the node editor works, if you've never worked with nodes, is it works
Редактор
from left to
узлов.
right, okay? And it's very simple at the moment because this thing, by the way, these boxes, these are called, nodes.
Я понял, кто теперь ходит в модерах. Сколько тут власти? Не злоупотребляй своей властью. Прежде чем что-то менять, лучше спроси сначала у меня.
Into the material output as the surface value, and that is what is being rendered. So if I was to add in another node and plug it in here, it would change how it looks. So as an example, if I went to add, and then I added in texture, let's just pick a texture. Let's go Voronoi texture. I've got another node here with some things, distance, color, position, and all things here. If I was to take this, plug this into my base color, you can see that now this is
У него теперь пятнистый пончик. Какой-то плесневый уже.
So it's lost the setting that was there before, that canary yellow. It's lost that and it's replaced it with the input of Voronoi texture.
Цветной.
Between distance and color. Texturing, it's a whole thing in and of itself. There's courses on procedural texturing. It's very interesting and you can do a lot with it. The great thing about a workflow like this, like using a node to create textures, is that you can come back and change it later on. Like if I was to paint in the this browning,
Мы не понимаем английского.
speckledy view there, that is one way that you could texture a donut. You could do it that way.
Печально.
If I then later on realize, like, the size of those speckledy,
Ну ничего.
they're too big or they're too brown.
Поэтому я и здесь.
If I'd painted that in,
Я его слова как бы
but I could if I had done it
трансформирую и вам все покажу.
non-destructive workflows like this, I could come back and change it at any time. So, anyways, you can see that going left into this.
Мы пока что никаких изменений не делаем.
That is how we are creating.
Пока что он только объясняет.
Okay, so let's delete that and let's now create the actual texture. Okay, so I'm going to add or Shift A, same hotkey as the 3D viewport, by the way. I'm going to add in the texture that you use, like 10 times more than any of these others, to be honest. Besides maybe image texture, is noise texture right here.
Так, текстура
So this
шума.
noise texture, you can see that you've got two outputs, you've got color and you've got factor, and they are very similar.
Ну как это не
Factor
пончик?
value is basically
Пончик — это тор из теста. Вот у него тор из теста в форме пончика.
just the grayscale
И
version.
сейчас у него, конечно, цвета бананового мороженого, но, конечно, все было проведено подтверждение. Ну ты, конечно, жук. Сам сделал голосование, сам проголосовал. И никто, кроме тебя, не проголосовал. О, привет, Миниас. Почему там нет дырок? Она есть. Она вот сверху. Она просто... Но ее не видно. Потому что мы смотрим на пончик сбоку, дырки не видно.
grayscale version of the color. So the color is giving us a sort of a rainbow splatter across everything. And if I change the scale here, I can change the size of that splattering effect. If I take the factor, put that into the base color, it's just the black and white version of that. Okay, so that's all very well and cool, but how do I create the colors of my original donut line, like the colors that I had here originally? By the way, if you want to cut a node string, which you've got there, you could just click and like remove it like that. Or if you just want to cut and slice through the middle, it's Control right mouse drag, and that'll bring out the knife, and then it will
Что такое дисбаланс 66?
connection, basically. So if I want to change the colors of
Мой
that,
зритель. А что?
I could do this by adding in another node between these two. And the node that I'm looking for is add, or Shift A, add, converter color ramp. Color ramp is a really handy node. You'll use it a lot. And if I drop that in between here, this is now taking the black and white values and is converting it into this range.
Кто он, расскажите.
See, if I just change these sliders, it's...
Ну, блин, кто он? Он человек. Когда-то он, по-моему, модератором был у меня. В ранние мои годы, в раннее время стриминга. Сейчас он уже давно не появляется. Вот.
Basically acting like a contrast of that noise texture. But I could change the colors here to be, you know, anything I wanted. I could make a really weird, horrible looking donut very quickly. But if I change these to something a little more similar to the original donut color, something like that maybe, and then maybe make this like a little bit darker, a little bit more saturated. Let's bring that across, or something like that. That looks a little closer to something right here.
Может, он забыл. Может быть. Я этого не исключаю.
Because what I want to do is I want to preview my noise texture here to show you something, but you can't really see it very well. And yeah, basically, go to your edit preferences, and then go to add-ons, and then just type in node, and you should see one here called Node Wrangler. So just enable that, and then this will enable you to, if you hold down Control, Shift, and left click on any node, you are then previewing just that node. So just seeing the raw output of that and bypassing all this other stuff. I could also Control Shift on the color ramp, and I could see just that. And then if I want to see everything, I just Control Shift click on the final shader there. The Node Wrangler is like the one add-on that all
Так, Control Shift
all the time.
клик.
It's so handy. You can do a bunch of stuff with it, but yeah, this is one really convenient feature. Anyways, what I wanted to show you with this noise texture here is that it's actually, there's a bit of noise, sorry, there's a bit of stretching. The size of these splotches here are different to how they look on the top. On the top, they look fine, but on the sides here, they look stretched. And that is a little bit technical, but the way that any texturing works in 3D software is it has to take a 2D texture. Think of like a Photoshop file. It's an image, and then it has to somehow map that onto a 3D model. In fact, this is actually very obvious when you add an image texture. So if I just add in an image texture, just to demonstrate this, yeah, let's use, why not? Let's use a thumbnail from the previous parts of this tutorial series. If I just paste this on here, bam.
О нет, он натянул себя на пончик.
Let's turn off, let's go for it, there you go. You can see that it's stretched around the donut. It's tried to add it. Yeah, it's mapped parts of that 2D texture onto this 3D model. It has to do it somehow. And it just so happens that the one that it does for procedural textures, which is what this is, this noise texture, it's just wrong. I think it uses UV or generated or something. Instead, we want to change it to something else. So we can do that by adding another image, another node over here to the left. So Shift A, and then the one that you are looking for is Input Texture Coordinate. Texture Coordinate. So the default one is generated. So if you don't have anything connected into your vector...
Как вы познакомились с Омбра? Какой что умеет колокольчики даешь в Дискорде, Хикари? Нет. Что за история знакомства? Я знаю, но в стриме же без звука и на телефоне. Ой, познакомились мы с Сомброй так, что я когда-то зашел к нему на стрим. Не помню, как я его нашел. А он мультики смотрел. Ну вот так и познакомились. Потом оказалось, что у нас есть общие знакомые. Вот, и в итоге... Так вот мы и познакомились. Потом в один момент мы собирали свое ютуберское объединение, оно распалось. Но это было... Это было в какие-то времена тяжелые. Как выше, что он имеет колокольчики уведомлений в вашем Дискорде? Ну вот как раз потому, что он когда-то был у нас в команде, поэтому были на него настроены уведомления. А после распада я уведомления не убрал, а просто сделал для них отдельную роль. А кто это? Да при чем здесь Хикари? Я не думаю, что Хикари с Сомброй знаком.
Input, which is, by the way, the vector input. Vectors, how do you explain?
Общие знакомые. А Сомбра знаком с Илиданом. И я знаком с Илиданом. Ну, еще там знакомые общие были. Хвоа. Да, и Сова.
Vectors? You don't. You just don't. In the beginning tutorial series, you don't need to know it. But really, the colors of these inputs, yellow goes to yellow, green goes to green, gray goes to gray. I mean, it doesn't actually, gray and yellow can be interchangeable. It doesn't really matter if gray goes into a yellow, but generally you want to use the same color going into the same color. So this blue one, you must make sure that at least you've always got a blue input going into it, but it should be a texture coordinate is the one you're looking for. So generated is the one that it will use by default if nothing is added into it. What we want to change it to is object. When you do that, you might think like, oh, it's broken, nothing's happened. It is there, it's just that the scale of this has changed. So I need to increase this to be much higher before I can see that back. And now you can see I don't have that stretching occurring across the donut. Basically, all...
Так, давайте повторим, а то он это очень много объясняет, а нам нужно действовать. Конечно, у меня пончик так себе, у него явно получше. Но у него там потолще, и глазурь как-то у него стекает, что ли. Более натурально. Так. Where? Идем в редактор шейдеров. Почему основной цвет? А, ну да. Во. Я просто хочу сам обосноваться на серии как дворянин. И все пришедшие будут контролироваться не мной, к счастью, а вами. Я всегда смогу размахнуть руками и сказать, что нет тут закона. Чего? Я не понял, в чем тут прикол. Почему дворянин? Для чего все это? Так, он там добавлял. В общем, да. Что он там объяснял? Что то, что сбоку есть панель для материала, это, конечно, хорошо. Но не совсем удобно, если нужно сделать что-то более сложное. Для этого и есть редактор шейдеров в виде вот таких вот узлов, соединенных соединениями. В данном случае мы хотим, чтобы наш пончик был не какого-то одного цвета, а с какими-то неровностями, как настоящий пончик. Для этого нам нужно добавить сюда шума. Поэтому мы идем, нажимаем Shift-A, текстура шума. Соответственно, у текстуры шума есть два выхода. Коэффициент, что представляет собой в оттенках серого вот такую вот штуку. Но это шум графический. А если цвет, то это будет какая-то радужная блевотина. Ну так вот. Но нам не нужен радужный пончик или серый пончик. Я хочу делать ваш сервер общим сервером со мной. Я буду гнать сюда людей из своей деятельности, а вы будете следить уже за ними. У меня даже будет прок от того, что я не модер. Подожди, то есть ты хочешь, чтобы это был сервер типа... Ну ты и так уже в этом сервере. Только это сервер, ну, мой. И сделать его общим с кем-то я не могу. Хочу как у Скейла. А что у Скейла? У Скейла там один канал. Ну ладно, два. Вот. О, Hildeus. Hello. How are you, my buddy? How are you doing? В общем-то, добавляем градиентную карту к нашему шуму. Привет, Сэнден. Такой Скейла, сервер Скейла. Но там есть каналы для творчества, где каждый может выкладывать, что он сделал. Но по сути это все еще сервер Scale, да. Так, нам нужны какие-нибудь цвета пончика зажаренного. Как сделать цвет пончика? Ня. У вас будет серый диван, но я буду жить внутри вас. Но ты и так живешь в моем сервере. Разве нет? Всем пока, счастья и добра. Уже спать идешь? Спокойной ночки. В теории я смогу взять справа на работу бота, который будет публиковать выход стримов от меня. А ты хочешь публиковать на моем сервере выход стримов от тебя? Неожиданно. Новое объединение. Ну, не знаю. текстура или вектор. А где? А, вот. Текстурные координаты объект. Мы с перышкой, я думаю, уже расстались. Скажу, что это из-за религиозных убеждений. Я вот думаю, еще больше масштаб сделать. Меньше. Призрак, привет. Блин, кстати, призрак. Я тебе хотел написать или рыцарю. Попросить аргумент на кору. Если возможно. У вас же есть стальной меридиан? Какой аргумент? На хлыст и на купол. Ну, по стандарту. Ну да, по стандарту. Так, ну в принципе вот у нас какие-то неровности на пончике появились. Но она же в чате. Да? Возможно. Я думаю, она пока что не захочет об этом говорить. Все-таки это тяжело. Вот так вот взять и переварить. Ай, сможете мне рассказать потом сами? Ну да, смогу. Что не так, призрак? Ненавижу корпус на рейле. Ну да. Кстати, одно из заданий ночной норы — это краю-джек. Мне пришлось в одиночку ходить. Орфиксы? А орфиксы только с корпуса падают. Найт свалил.
Object, it will basically treat the 3D view rather, instead of like wrapping it around, it'll sort of like try to understand it like in a 3D depth, the depth of it, and like if this part of the mesh is like hitting this part of the cloud, it'll map it to there. And anyway, that's sort of the way I imagine it. It's just, yeah, it does the correct mapping essentially for our donut. So we'll change.
Какие луковые кольца? Луковые кольца по-другому выглядят. Во-первых, лук он белый, а во-вторых, если ты говоришь про жареные луковые кольца, так они гораздо темнее. И у них это... Ну, на них там панировочные сухари налепляют, поэтому они так очень-очень шершавые, практически как наждачка.
The scale of this. Okay, this is
Так что это
deploy for
пончик.
procedural workflows like this. You can change the size and shape and things of anything you want. You can also change the detail, which you can't really see much going on here. But if you go like detail 0, it's just like soft big shapes. But then you can increase it, and it's kind of like it's adding more and more smaller shape splotches in between it almost. But default is 2. Let's just leave it at that. All right. The other thing I want to do in this case is I want to create, and this is the joy of nodes, is that you can take the output of this and not just use it for the color input, which we've got here, but actually make it dry.
Фаворизатор рецепи. Что ты мне там прислал? Так. Я знаю, как выглядят луковые кольца. Да, но мой пончик не должен выглядеть как луковое кольцо. Может быть, он, конечно, слишком худой. Но я не виноват, что я так вижу свой пончик. О, привет, подушка. Укушу немножко. Короче, луковые кольца я понимаю. Но мой пончик это пончик, а не луковое кольцо. Савардо. Жаль, я не могу сделать так, чтобы когда заварду у меня такой эффект на весь экран, который останавливает кадры на несколько секунд, потом возвращает.
Looking at our reference here, you can see it especially on the silhouette, but you can see it here, like the surface. If you were to run your fingernail across that donut, you would see it like it would raise. There's little bumps and micro grooves happening across there. So we want to make this splotchy effect not just affect the color, but also affect the bump. And we can do that by adding another node, because what we need to do is make it drive this normal input. And there is no way you could ever guess that normal is what would drive the bump information of a shader. And while it would be great to make it like user-friendly and say it's not just used for bump, it's used for a bunch of things. It's basic. Normal is the directions of the face on the model, essentially. So if you're doing something to the normals of a shader, you are changing the appearance of the way those faces look. It's all very technical. It's kind of mathematical. You don't really need to know it, other than to say that this is a blue input, input. So you couldn't take, and you could try.
Почему он говорит, что это синий вход, когда это фиолетовый? Хотя для упрощения возможно.
I would actually love it if it just came up as red. Like, don't do that. This thing should just be red. We need to convert this first into information that the normal thing can read. So to do that, we want to hit Shift A and then go Vector, and the node I'm looking for is Bump. Okay, if I dropped this in here, if I drop it over a highlighted connector, it will now automatically drop it in there in the middle and connect it. It's done it terribly though. It's tried to guess, but it's done a bad job. I don't want to drive the normal input. I want to put it into the height input. Height. Okay, now it is appearing the way it should. It's just way too strong. Now you might think that what you need to change is the strength. It's actually not correct. The strength should always be 1. It's kind of like on or off, like bump. The one that you're looking for is distance, which is how in the 3D space, like how big do you want these bumps to appear? So it doesn't have a nice slider or anything, but it's the one you need. And I believe, I could be totally wrong on this, but I have heard, I'm pretty sure it's correct, but this distance value is in Blender units, which is by default metric. So this is treating this bump as if it is 1 meter. Like, you want the bumps to be 1 meter, which is ridiculous. So it's about 100 times.
Как думаете, должны ли быть на пончике пупырышки высотой 1 метр? Мне кажется, нет.
That's what it should be. So I'm going to change this to 0.002. 0.002. And now that is much
Да.
better. You can't really see.
Да ты психопат какой-то. Зачем тебе такие пупырышки на пончике?
Can you see it? You can see it okay. You would see it a lot better actually if you turned up the detail. Now this is the joy of bump mapping, of normal mapping really, because that's what this is. This is fakery. All this detail here is detail that you get for free. You can see it's not changing the silhouette of our donut, okay, which is important. This is just, it's a fakery illusion to pretend as if this
Fakery illusion.
It doesn't. So it's only appearing on the shader, so on the faces of the light and everything.
Запоминаем. Fakery illusion.
If you wanted to do that, you would have to pay for it with so much higher, like, mesh density and everything. We did it actually for the previous tutorial. We'll not be using it for this because it was overkill. I went way too far on that. We're just going to keep it simple and make it look nicer as well.
Так, в общем, нам нужно добавить детали на наш пончик, а именно пупырки. Что мы делаем? Вот эта штука нормаль, она как раз поможет нам. Нормаль, по сути, когда дольше получал доступ к ничему, проходил. К чему доступ? Да это не фолковые кольца. Как можно вообще... Как можно вообще подумать, что это луковое кольцо? Да что такое, призрак? Я не понимаю. О чем ты вообще? К чему ты там получаешь доступ? Так, нам нужна карта неровностей. Да. Нормально. Сюда. Коэффициент в высоту. И... Где? Офигеть. Ну вот как раз у нас пупырышки высотой в 1 метр. Поэтому нам нужно сделать расстояние где-нибудь 1 сантиметр. Или 1/10 сантиметра. Вот. Я вам говорил повысить детальность. И, возможно, стоит чуть увеличить расстояние. Ух ты ж. Ну вот как-то так, что ли. Смотрите теперь, какой он классный, сморщенный. Но на самом деле он не должен быть таким. Возможно, мне стоит... Возможно, мне стоит детальность чуть сделать меньше. Ну вот как-то так примерно. Примерно 5. Ну и расстояние оставлю таким. 375 VR. LS. Сейчас гляну. Нифига себе. Это что? Какая-то огненная эфемера? Или что? Протовир. Я не понимаю, что за протовир. А, ты про нагрудник. Ну да. Что-то в этом определенно есть. Ну вот, я думаю, 3 детали. Самое то. Такой отличный пончик.
So I often joke like the person who discovered normal mapping, oh, this
А вот я бы стыдился на люди говорить, что играю в Warframe, даже если бы играл, то не сказал бы.
technique
Не знаю, чего тут стыдиться. Это игра.
for bot mapping must have fallen out of their chair, like in 1990s or 80s or whatever. They must have been like, this is the key that will finally enable us to create the detail needed in film and everything without having to pay for it on our, you know, ridiculously slow computers. Because it's really insane what it's doing for free. It's all video games use normal maps because it's fake detail and you don't have to pay for it with render times. So it is phenomenal. Anyways, so I don't want to use a detail of 3 because look, this is where it comes into like how detailed, how realistic do you want your donut to look? Because if you go really detailed, you kind of have to do it for everything or else this one part will look odd. I see it a lot because I got 2 kids now, 1, 2, 1, 4. One that is 2 years old, one that is 4. That was a weird sentence. And they just watch terrible kids shows because there's just so much terrible kids content out there. It's just like all kids shows, they just don't care about like detail consistency.
Причем
They'll
тут
have like
детские
a
шоу?
high-res grass model and then just like this simplified
О,
house. And
привет.
it's like, why? Why? Just, like,
Как дела? Я сегодня сдал зачет. И я очень рад. Потому что я так нервничаю. Так что вот сегодня мы отдыхаем. Учимся 3D моделировать. 3D моделированию учимся. Вот. Не знаю, смотрел ли ты, кому сдал. Преподавателю. Я в университете учусь. Может, еще меньше сделать детали? Где-нибудь 2,5. Чтобы он не был слишком детализированным. Вот. Если кому интересно, зачет был по обработке изображений.
can you not tell that like super detailed mega scans grass model doesn't go with that like Jupiter
Похоже,
house
сегодня мы больше
detail
ничего не
on this
будем делать.
view simplified.
Ну, точнее, я имею в виду, что...
Changed much. And we're gonna in the next part actually do some texture painting.
Ты знаешь, чей Крым? Давай без этого. Без политики.
But you can see that it's got more visual interest there than was before. I might actually turn that down to like an even subtler amount, maybe somewhere in the middle. You can change it at any point in the process. That is the joy of 3D rendering.
Ну, можно и так решить этот вопрос.
In the next part, we are going to be doing the painting
Призрак
aspect, where we're going
владеет. Запомните главное. Я никто, кроме меня.
So our existing node setup is a purely procedural workflow. This is all using computer
Так,
mathematics.
вот это вот 8-я часть. Texture painting. Что-то сейчас будет.
And everything to create the result, which is all great and it enables us to adjust things later on. It's great. But for the next thing that we want to add is this white bit around our donut, where it's been sitting in.
Я, кстати, забыл, но... Все, Мио. Милоща, я тебя укусил.
Fat, but it's like getting
Безумно можно быть Димой. Безумно можно ломать спины.
hot fat on the surface maybe, so it's cooking it less, so it's a white part of it. And there's a number of ways, you know, there's always 100 ways to skin a cat in Blender. You could do it many different ways. You can make a gradient thing, do it all procedurally as well. But I find the fastest way, and actually probably the most, for something like this, like it's kind of like creative and you want to add some variation thing in there, you want to use texture painting. So Blender has that feature, texture paint, the little workspace at the top there. Click that, and this will take you to the texture paint window. Now, if you were to switch here, you can see that our donuts become purple, and that's because it needs an image texture to paint into, and one does not exist yet. You could create one over here, but really...
Теперь в клане технарей вампиров. Теперь жизнь на Сферату покажется вам миром света.
What you need to do first, and because we've already got a node set up already created over here, the best way to do it to make sure...
В смысле? Шар. Вау, ты пережил рулетку.
That you do it correctly and you haven't lost something, is to add an image texture and then paint into that. When, like, basically add an image texture first and then switch to texture paint. So right up here, I'm going to hit Shift A, then go Input. Is it Input? Sorry, Texture, Image Texture. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. Image texture is the one you're looking for. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug that into the base color. So I'm going to override this. In fact, I don't need the color ramp anymore. I'm just going to keep the noise texture that's going into the bump at the moment. So now that I've got this image texture, there's no...
У него теперь из черного пластилина пончик какой-то.
Added, and no, I'm actually surprised it's black now. It used to be purple. Anytime Blender can't find an image texture, it would come up as purple. But evidently it's black for some reason. Anyways, you could, if you were to hit these two buttons here, Open will open a texture from your hard drive, as we demonstrated in the last
О май гад, он опять натянул себя на пончик.
If you want to paint into something or paint something from scratch, you want to hit New. And by the way, this one on the left-hand side here, this will show you any textures that's currently loaded into Blender. I could bring that up as well. So this is the previous reference photo that I loaded into Blender. So it's like temporarily storing it in the background so that I could recall it later on if I wanted.
Сэнтон. Зачем? Что не так, призрак? Скажи уже. Ты меня заинтриговал.
What I want to click on is New, because I want to create a new image texture. So I'm going to hit New, and then when you hit New, you get this like temporary little window pop-up thing. This is where we can change some values of things. The most important thing is the height and width. So this is the resolution of the image texture we're going to paint into. So obviously, the higher res you go, then the more
Начальники
detail
сейчас
you can make.
заполнять.
So this is, I mean, you really shouldn't do this as you're a beginner, because you won't know, like, depending on what model you're making, like how high res you need to go. But generally, like...
Научиться надо, от этого никуда не денешься.
You need to think, like, how close is the camera going to be to my
Я
object?
писать нормально не могу.
How, like, am I rendering
Что-то с рукой
4K?
произошло.
Really close? Yes, you're going to need to maybe render in, like, 2 or 4K or something as a texture to paint into, right? But if it's something like this, like, honestly, you don't even need this big of an image. That's over. And the reason you don't want to go too big of an image is that the higher you go, the longer your render is going to take, because Blender will have to load that texture in into the like the memory to render with it. It's also going to be slower to work with whilst you're creating shaders and everything else. So you want
Не, Сэндон, проблема не в этом. Мозоль на полруки? Откуда? Ты что, непрерывно подтягивался весь день напролет? На турнике, покрытом наждачкой?
I'm just clicking and dragging down so that I can change both of the values at the same time. And I want to halve it. And the easiest way to halve it is to do the math in the field, which is a cool thing that Blender lets you do. So if I add in /, that's divide by, and then number 2, and then enter, it's now halved it, basically. So it's now 512. And by the way, why don't you just like type in like 500? Like why 512? 512 seems like an odd number. It's one of those, like, you know, computer technical things. It's like keeping it to the power of 2, I believe. It just makes it easier for it to process and store the information or like render it in the correct space. I don't know. Honestly, I haven't looked into it too much. I've been using Blender for 15 years, but it's best to try to keep it with it. You know, it's like the memory of the computer. It's like 128, 256, 512, 124, etc. You kind of go in that. I don't know. Maybe the nerds just insult you.
Не могу себе это представить, но, наверное, это весело, призрак.
But anyways, just divide it by 2. I'm going to go 512. Now the base color, you could change it later on when we actually start painting, but just to make it easier, I'll just do it now. I'll set a sort of a base color of a donut. So something around about a value of a 0.8, saturation of around about a 0.6, something like that. I'll go with that. And then the name, which I could also change later, but I'll name it now. Donut base. I don't need alpha, and then I'm going to hit OK. Haha. So if this is that color is the same as this color, then it would just be doing like nothing would have changed right now, because this is a solid image texture, which we can't see, right? But which we can't, like, I can't show you the image like on this view, but if we click on texture paint mode, you should see that it's shown up right here. When you click to texture paint mode, it should show you by default. This is the properties here.
Какой еще фильтр агрессии?
But if you click on active tool there, active tool, which it's always just visible, I believe, and it's always the active tool. And because we are in texture paint mode on our object, it's now showing us the texture paint. So it's saying, where are you painting into?
Пускай автомат остается.
And it's painting into our donut base texture. And over here on the left hand side,
Откуда ты узнал, что у меня именно левая перевязана? А я разве что-то говорил про левую руку? Я вообще не понимаю, что за фигня с трактором. В тракторе ты же просто в кабине сидишь и рулишь. Разве нет? Типа, как он может тебя задирать? Он что, говорит тебе, что ты говно? Я не знаю. И ты ему такой в ответ: да ты сам говно.
you should see the solid color, which is the new image which we've created. If you can't see it, just...
В смысле уверен? Я тебя спрашиваю, что это значит? Ты задираешь трактор, а он тебе.
Select it over here and it should show up. Okay, now if I was to change this color to be something and just paint, you can see I'm painting onto my model. And you should also see it showing up on your image texture over there. Okay, now, because the other thing you can do is you can change this.
Я не знаю, как выглядит стандартный огородный трактор. О чем ты? Какой еще стандартный огородный трактор? Но сейчас пойду гуглить, что за стандартный огородный трактор. Так, ну что-то я нашел. Без кабины. Просто типа машина с 4 колесами, сиденье, руль и спереди мотор. Культиватор. Ну хорошо. Поищем культиватор. А как ты видишь, я же тебе не показывал. Итак, культиватор. А это уже какая-то ручная машина. Как газонокосилка, только с какими-то косами. И ты типа ходишь вручную пашешь. Вот она.
I mean, it's normally automatically set to this, but in my case it's not. I want to change to paint mode, and then I could actually paint directly over here as well. So this is, again, sort of talking about the image coordinates. To take a texture, and a 2D flat texture, and map it onto a 3D model, it has to wrap it in some way according to texture coordinates. So this coordinates that we're using right now is the UV map. So if I was to actually go into edit mode, just go to edit mode right here, you can see these are my image, whatever, my mesh, right? And it's created this grid here. So each of these single grids, in fact, if I was to switch, don't do this, I'm just doing it so I can show you, and then go to sync mode, right? If I was to select different parts of this mesh, you can see which parts it actually correlates with on the image texture. There's actually a great image on Twitter. I'll paste it up here so you can see it, but it's yeah, it was like the best way to explain UV coordinates to like a toddler even is like a Christmas ornament, like a chocolate of a Christmas like little Santa thing. It's the exact same thing. It's taking a 2D thing and then it is wrapping it around the model. So that is what it's doing. So we're painting onto a 2D texture, which is then being mapped onto it. So you could paint over here, or you could paint onto your model. It's generally much easier to paint onto the model, and that's what we're going to do. So I will, what view am I in? Yeah, let's go. Okay, image, editor, paint mode, and then texture paint mode. Okay, and then this is turned on again. I gotta turn that off. Okay, display. I don't want the image texture. Okay, all right, and then I want to change the fill thing. For some reason, it sets it as white. I don't know. And then I'll just click, single click, and now I've got my my donut base there. Solid color base, I mean. All right. Now, if I was
Что
to set
весело,
this
не
to a
спорим, но
bright color,
страшно, когда
let's go,
сердце на
yeah,
баянке
0.8 fine. And then I'll set it to kind of
перевернуться.
like a low strength. And I don't have, I've got a Cintiq sitting right next to me, but I will not use it because instead I'm going to click
Ну это да.
like this, just like you guys are with your little mouse. But obviously, if you've got a stylus, then it's much better because you've got pen pressure. You don't have to do as many clicks. Click, 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 click. But yeah, I'm painting around the middle part, and you can see that it's reflected over there. I could also paint across here. I could set my brush strength. And the brush strength, same hotkey as we did with sculpting, it's F to change your size, not strength. Size is F, and then strength is Shift F, which is the exact same hotkeys as sculpting. Which is nice. It's a nice thing that Blender does. It tries to use the...
А зачем он красит
You see that little
центр
pop up there? That was
пончика?
like one of my scripts, my add-ons that I've got enabled, just had a fit right then for some reason. I don't know why. But that's third-party add-ons. You know, you get what...
Будете перезаливать стрим, где плакали? А зачем? Мне как-то стыдно, если у меня будет на канале на ютубе запись стрима, где я плачу. Чтобы люди не волновались. Так в том-то и дело, что если выложу, люди будут волноваться. Зачем он красит середину пончика в серый цвет?
But anyways, yeah, one of the good things about Blender is like the hotkeys are generally consistent. Like G for grab and S and scale and rotate. You can even do that. You can do that everywhere. Like for nodes, like, yeah, I didn't even show you, but like, yeah, you could like take these and like scale them with S and rotate them. It's like, why would you need to rotate? But like you can. Like all of the hotkeys are the same everywhere in Blender. It's really nice actually that they've done that. Unlike Adobe, looking at you. Try and go from like Adobe to Illustrator.
Кто придумает? Тот, кто был на стриме, тот знает. Вот. Кто не был на стриме, тот вообще не знает о том, что я на стриме плакал. Вот и все. Все просто.
And it's like, what? Like the pen tools are different? Like everything's got a different... Ah, it just drove me crazy. Anyways. By the way, if you...
Может, на Твиче только открою видео с этим, чтобы оно недельку повисело и все. А зачем тебе говорить людям? Зачем ты будешь суету поднимать?
You hit X, that is a hotkey from Photoshop. I know I just bad-mouthed Adobe, but there's a hotkey from Adobe of Photoshop. It's the same here. We'll just swap between two like a foreground and background color. So I want to keep white, but then I want to make this one my donut color. So
Если хочешь, чтобы люди не волновались, то не надо рассказывать им, что я плакал на стриме. Это же очевидно.
So the reason I'm doing this like sort of staggered thing is this is kind of how it looks. I mean, that looks like solid white.
Типа он покрасил бок пончика в белый цвет, потому что он видит это на референсе, но там не белый цвет. А еще там края желтые.
I think that was like a homemade recipe. But this one, I've just looked in other photos, and it seems to be not a constant color that goes all around it. It's sort of like splotchy. There'll be parts that'll have more, and parts that'll have less. Not sure if you can hear, but yeah, there's a crow that's just going ape outside. I like rented my office, my little studio here, and it's just a residential block. And I'm like, I have to make sure there's no like barking dog next door because that'll just like ruin tutorials. And I'm like, all right, dogs are cool. All right, everybody seems cool. Okay, I'm gonna do it. And then I like move in. Didn't realize that like at odd times throughout the day, it's just the trees around here. You just have birds fighting constantly and just
Так,
barking at each
нам
other.
нужно покрасить пончик. Стримите вы в разное время. То в 5 часов ночи, то в 19 дня. Ну, вот так вот. Да, вот так вот. Вот так вот, да. Да, вот так вот. Ну, получается. Так вот у меня получается. Что теперь? Так. Нам нужно покрасить свой пончик в такой более запеченный цвет. Конечно, могли бы сделать что-то типа такого. Ой. Но это уже что-то страшное. Поэтому что мы делаем? Текстура, изображение, текстура. Цвет от него идет основной цвет. А эта градиентная карта нам, в принципе, не нужна. Вот у нас такой пончик получился. Далее, что мы делаем? Создаем новую текстуру. Назовем ее Donut Base, как у него. И поставим 512 ширину, высоту. Цвет поставим что-то ближе к пончиковому. Что-то что-то такое. Вот такое. Без альфы. Да. Читаю первое сообщение Софы. Вот. Теперь нам нужно эту текстуру подправить. Потому что это... Ну, это явно не то. Стоит ли подключать мой графический планшет? Почему бы и нет? Ох. Впервые буду использовать графический планшет для 3D моделирования. Однако его вроде как используют довольно часто. Так, вот он мой курсор. Эти запылилась чутка. Нехорошо. Открываем Texture Paint. Так. Кисть. Так. Все, мы уже можем рисовать. Да, мы можем рисовать. Расскажите, ну что вам даст навык создания пончика? Вы что, на пекаре для 3D принтеров учитесь? Конечно, нет. Однако, это... Тут не в том прикол, что мы учимся делать именно пончик. Тут прикол в том, что мы именно учимся каким-то базовым навыкам, работая в блендере. Куплю завтра себе такой же пончик в 5. Купи. Блин, оно не совпадает. Ладно, я вручную буду. Правда, мне его как-то... А ну, хотя я могу вот так вот вращать. По сути, в блендере все можно делать с помощью стилуса. Даже без мышки. То есть я могу, допустим, какую-нибудь 3D-модельку сделать. Ее немножко покрасить вручную. Как делают люди, допустим, печатают на 3D принтере какие-то фигурки и их аэрографом раскрашивают. Но пончик, конечно, не однородный нифига. А еще он почему-то какой-то слишком темный. Надо его как-то... Блин, какая-то какашка получилась на текстуре. Ё-моё. Надо немножко осветлить наш пончик. Ну-ка, как он на рендере смотрится. Но я не знаю. Не, ну на превью он так-то смотрится в целом неплохо. Эх, так будете создавать сервер? Я не знаю. Возможно. Можем, в принципе, после более насыщенный пончик. Почему бы и нет? Прекрасно. Дайте я просто все это залью. Почему? Почему? Ладно. Сейчас все перекрасим Почему у меня какие-то проблемы с текстурами? Так. Откуда у него такая хорошая шершавая поверхность? А это мы сделали с помощью шейдинга. Мы добавили ему эти пупырышки. Вот. Теперь нам нужно сделать цвет светлее и поменьше кисть. Да, только теперь это не светлее, а насыщеннее получилось. Фак. Что мне делать теперь? Надо сделать saturation где-то в половину. А ну. Ну, почти. Да. Вы мне про музыку не напомнили, а сами и забыл. Что ж такое? Ну, вот такая вот будет у него немножко непропеченность в середине. Противостояние пончика и Димы. Скорее, текстуры пончика и Димы. Он получится у меня не пропеченный, к сожалению. Но я старался. Пускай будет так.
So I just have to deal with it, or more like you have to deal with it. But I don't even know if you can hear it. It's hard to understand what the microphone will pick up. All right, so that's pretty good. All right, not bad. Cool. We got a thing. All right. Now, one thing to note is when you do texture painting on a texture that you have created in Blender, or you've altered or modified in Blender, you can see that on this image thing up here, you've got a little star. And that star means that this image is not actually saved yet. It's actually, it's only visible in your current blend session, right, temporarily. If you were to actually quit right now, which I'll just do something dangerous and say quit, it'll say, do you want to save your changes, first of all, for your blend file, but also, do you want to save your modified images? That's a new feature of Blender, by the way. Never used to have that. So it used to be all the time people would paint something in Blender, and then they would go, wow, that's loud. They would say, what happened to my texture? Like, why is it not in the thing? It's like, yeah, you didn't save it. So you want to save your texture. So you want to go save or save as, and it will then say, where do you actually want to, where do you want to save it? Okay, so let's save it right here. I'll call this, yeah, donut base. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And now that little star there is gone. So that means now that if I was to exit, it doesn't matter because this thing is...
Да, текстуру нужно еще сохранить. Давайте сохраним, конечно. Только вот и где? Ну а здесь сохраним. Это получается, у меня даже специальная папка есть под этот проект. Я про это уже и забыл.
As happening. If I was to do another little paint session here, the star has appeared again because it hasn't saved it. So the hotkey to save just the image texture, it's Alt-S. Do that, and it's now saved over the image. All right, so back at my shader over here, I like the way this looks, but I want to also use parts of my noise texture, which is what I had before, because I want to have that, this look, right? where I've got that kind of
Аудиоботик, вылезай.
browny, white, yellowy parts where it's all kind of like splotchy across it, like it's been sitting in a fryer, kind of uneven. I feel like the more like commercial because I've looked at so many donut references, the more commercial the donut operation, the more uniform and plain your donuts will appear. But if you're like doing homemade donuts or like artisanal donuts, I'm sure that's a thing now.
Сейчас
you'll
этот
get,
урок
like, more
доделаем, и
interesting
я его
shapes and
включу.
things. So, anyways, take that as you will. All right, so what I want to do is I want to take the output of my noise texture and somehow infuse it with my base colors here. And the way that you do that is, in this case, because it is not a... If you were combining two shaders, which is a whole, you know, shaders, whatever, you would do it with a mix shader, and you would get two inputs, which is a green. So you would take the green into the green, blah, blah, blah. What we want to do is combine two yellow, like the color of this tells you what sort of information it's being transported across. I want to take this grayscale and this yellow, which is basically just color information, and I want to combine them. So what I need is another node called a add color mix RGB. So if I take this mix RGB, drop this in right here, and then take the output of my factor input and drop this into the bottom input right here. What this will do now is if I set this factor amount here is showing which one do you want to show. If it's all the way to the left, it's showing just the
Mix
top
RGB.
input. If it's all the way to the right, it's showing just the bottom input. Okay, and it's a simple like opacity slider. It's like if it's in Photoshop and there's a layer above it and you're changing the opacity. That's all it is doing. This mix box type, whatever, that is just like Photoshop. It is a blend type. It's a blending mode, which is in invert order for some reason. There we go. Now it's the correct order. And that will take, basically it'll do the exact same thing that it would in Photoshop. So this is an overlay. If I want to take just the dark parts of my bottom input, then multiply is the one that I want. So that way it'll ignore all of the white areas. Shader compilation, the downfall of Eevee. It'll ignore all the white areas and just use the dark values. So now that this bottom input just becomes the dark thing. The one that I actually want though is overlay. Overlay, similar to multiply, but it will also, as well as darkening areas, it will also add it. So if you look at just the add one, then it will do the opposite of the multiply. It will not darken, but it'll ignore the dark areas and only use the white areas. So overlay does both, kind of. It'll brighten it if it appears brighter than the texture underneath it, and it will darken it if it is darker than the texture underneath it. So the factor input there is like the strength of it, really.
Нам снова понадобится шейдинг. Да, я забываю постоянно, что просто в рисовательных программах перемещаться, это пробел. Перемещаться по-другому как-то. В общем, нам нужно добавить цвет микс RGB. Мы хотим как-то наложить шум на этот donut base, чтобы у нас цвет был немножечко все-таки зависящим от этих пупырок. Поэтому вот так делаем. Коэффициент сюда. Он нам советует использовать оверлей, то есть наложение. Ждем, пока шейдер у нас компилируется. Ну вот. Соответственно, мы можем видеть, что у нас накладывается этот оверлей. И мы можем выбрать каким коэффициентом. Допустим, 0,4. Чуток затрагивало.
The strength of how much of this bottom input do you want to add as an overlay thing on top, basically. So all the way to 1 is way too high. I don't want to go.
А еще, кстати, у нас все-таки слишком много деталей. Ставлю 2. Просто каждый раз, когда я на него смотрю, как будто деталей слишком много. 1,5. Пускай будет 1,5. Я не знаю. так вот.
that far.
У него как-то...
Add some
У него выглядит получше. Почему-то.
in fact, I might change my scale of this to be a little bigger. That looks pretty nice, actually. And my recording just crashed because I ran out of disk space. I should have listened to that notification that popped up. But anyways, it's a matter of just tinkering until you're happy with the result.
Да, конечно. Подстраивай, пока тебя не устроит результат. Да фиг меня устроит результат, я плохо нарисовал текстуру. Я мало того, что плохо рисую, я еще и плохо рисую текстуру. Ай, куда? Назад. Ну да, все сломалось. Странно. Ну да ладно. Текстуре серьезно недостает какой-то пропеченности. Ой. Аккуратно. Но как-то ее затемнить вряд ли я смогу. Надо цвет тебя сделать темнее, более насыщенным. Ну давайте покрасим верхнюю часть. Ну хорошо. Давайте попробуем. Наверное, это стало лучше. Я без понятия. Мой пончик уже в любом случае ничего не спасет.
It's the joy of 3D. You can just pull up your reference and, side by side and go, do I want something like that or do I want something like this? And what can I do to try to improve it? But this is a...
Видимо, органика это не для меня.
Get a feel now for how nodes work, right? We've got an image texture that's being added with a procedural one combined into a base color, and then that same procedural one is also driving bump and reading left to right. We can see how our shader is made up of. All these values that don't have anything plugged into them are obviously just values. If I wanted to, I could also make like this roughness. I could take the output of my noise texture and make it apply to my roughness as well. So I would have what looks like, well, we'll see once the shaders compilation finishes. Not much actually, but there should be some parts that look kind of like smudges. That's kind of a way to make a smudge map basically. You'll have parts that will look more diffused, like more matte, and then other parts that'll look glossy, and you could like exaggerate it with a color ramp. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here and just mucking around, but you can see how valuable nodes are and why before nodes, oh, it was tough times back in my day of Blender. There you go. You got what looks like puddles all over your donut now, just by making this noise texture.
У него лужа на пончике.
You can do a lot with it.
Но он не
So that's it. That'll do it
расстраивается.
for this part. So go ahead, click on the screen here to join me in the next part of our donut series. And I won't announce it just in case it changes again.
О, в следующем уроке мы будем делать посыпку. Прекрасно. Но давайте-ка мы включим бота. А, ну хотя да, я же могу и так делать. О май гад. Может, пожалуйста, здесь сырочек на версии 1.11? А почему 1.11? Есть же такая прекрасная версия Майнкрафта, как 1.16.5. Ну все.
So we want to add some sprinkles to our donut, and obviously manually placing them by hand would be absolutely mad. And the previous method, which would be to use particles, which is what I taught from my old. So our existing node setup is a pure. So we want to add some sprinkles to our donut, and obviously manually placing them.
Да, кстати, давайте попробуем. Куда? Я не хотел. Как мне соединить окна? Почему я их продолжаю дублировать? Как мне их соединить? Серьезно. Почему? Как-то он показывал, что их можно соединить. Помимо вот так вот. Ну ладно. Придется так. Возвращаем нашу глазурь. Возвращаем нашу плоскость. И смотрим, как оно будет в рендере смотреться. Ну, знаете, в целом, неплохо. В целом неплохо. Пойдет.
А что сделали в 1.16.5?
Ну, просто для меня 1.16.5 это, так скажем, какая-то завершенная версия. Такая универсальная. На которой можно остановиться и, в принципе, все. Там есть подмостки. Подмостки, чего у нас не было на прошлом сервере. Мы искали бамбук, но мы его не нашли. Ну просто 1.11, типа. Но есть 1.12. Почему 1.11? Какая-то... Вот знаешь, есть более значимые версии, есть менее значимые версии. Вот. На мой взгляд, 1.12 более значимая, чем 1.11. Не знаю почему, но вот так вот. Для меня значимые версии это какие? Это 1.5.2, 1.6.4, 1.8, 1.12 и вот 1.16.5. Мои, так сказать, чекпоинты в истории Майнкрафта, по которым я лично двигался.
By hand would be absolutely mad. And the previous method, which would be to use particles, which is what I taught from my old donut tutorial series, that's glitched.
Что ты сделал? Ты мне прислал аугменты на кору? Или может ты что-то открыл крутое? Над чем ты там трудился? А, ну или ты расписал учебники. Кстати, это я вспомнил, да.
Нет.
Dated, and thank goodness we don't have to touch it.
Поешь омлет.
Because there is a new and better,
Он
new,
прошел
amazing
Warframe.
geometry nodes.
Я заполнил все книги
Which,
и...
in the name,
И
tells you a little bit about what it does. Similar to what we just covered, nodes, similar to material nodes. Geometry nodes let you combine things, take this value, put it into that value, and then create new things, but for geometry, as in the actual mesh, the objects that are going on in your scene. It's really, really powerful. It's almost hard to overstate just how powerful it is. Because, for example, you could make a building, one building that has controls for the size of the building that changes depending on the number of floors it has, and then you've got like infinite variations. Or you could create a geometry node system for power poles, right? So that they dynamically link together. And then
Могу
when they get
скнуть
close to
эту
a
башню
building, it like
ужаса.
attaches it there. Or you could make
Давай,
isomers
я
dynamically
посмотрю.
together on objects the closer they get together. Not to mention all the crazy stuff that it enables for animation and motion graphics. And that's just getting started. Like, this feature was only introduced very recently, and
Скинуть.
it's already enabling so much.
Только главное, скинь не со стола. Скинь там не в ОС.
Fellow Blender users who learned geometry nodes when it was first introduced about 8 months ago for 2.92. Most of that's kind of redundant now because they have updated geometry nodes to a new fields-based system, and it's much easier to use.
So-
Don't get me wrong, it was the right decision, but it's surprising that it happened so soon after they just first introduced it. So I did a tutorial on it, and now that tutorial is kind of outdated. Shame for me. But anyways, I'm going to show you the new method. It is easier for everyone to use, and it's good that they did it. But anyways, let's get to it. So you want to obviously select the object you want to have the sprinkles scattered on, which is our icing.
Так, мне, наверное, уже не понадобится графический планшет, пожалуй, так что я его пока отставлю обратно на полочку. Это он у меня тут значительное место занимает. Хотя, знаете, пум-пум-пум. Уже 1 час 48 минут стримим. Я думаю, что самое время мне немножечко взять перерыв, сходить попить
And to
квас.
access geometry node,
Да. Так что я вернусь через 5 минуточек.
О, опять покидаете нас.
На 5 минуточек. Я что, не могу оставить вас на 5 минуточек?
Это и так много. Плак, плак, плак. А зачет сдал, красава. Плак, 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 плак. Что такое? Дима ушлю за хлебом и не вернулся еще. Плак, 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 плак. Это нормально. Оно живое. В 2 часа ночи проснусь, чтобы напарник мог пойти поспать. Лучше бы меня оставили на 5-й общаге, чем на 1-й.
Не ждали? А я вернулся. О, вижу, Найт присоединился. Точнее, извините, рыцарь. Оно живое. 2 часа ночи проснуться, чтобы напарник мог пойти поспать. Лучше бы меня спитали на 1-й. Это общаги чуть на 1-й. О, похоже, рыцарь не выспался. Прискорбно. Я тебя укушу немножко для заряда адреналина.
You could do it a couple of ways. One would be to split your view and then change this new view to the geometry node editor. But I instead prefer to create a workspace for it. So if you click the, because there's not one here by default, if you click the little plus icon, then go general, there is one that you can enable called geometry nodes. So click that, and now we've got this extra one at the top there for geometry nodes. I'm going to move this over. Oh, you can't actually move it over. How about that? I just assumed that you could. I don't think I've ever tried to do that in Blender. All right, well, it's over on the right-hand side. I know where it is.
Сейчас гляну. Страх всех. Ой, какая фотка маленькая. Общесознание. А почему 2 литературы? Ну хотя 2 части, ладно. Фотка просто маленькая, не видно.
Я снова тут.
Прекрасно. О, ура! Мне ответил преподаватель по научной работе. Как таковых замечаний нет, но объем работы маленький. Нужно хотя бы до 10 страниц увеличить. Предлагаю... Я, кстати, тебя, рыцарь, укусил. Чтоб ты не был сонный. Вот. Не слишком сильно, не беспокойся.
Ага.
Вот.
За что?
Не за что, а для чего? А для чего? А для того, чтобы он не был сонным. Предлагаю добавить противоположную генератор, например, сами генераторы, которые работают на основных принципах.
У меня блядских 2 ночи, я поспал от силы 3 Для того, чтобы нам завидно было.
А ты что, хочешь, чтобы я тебя тоже укусил?
Нет.
Ну вот и все. Вот и не завидуй.
you can see it's split and arranged our windows. I don't want this one at the top here. This is like a spreadsheet for your vertices and stuff going on in the scene. Bit too
Кстати,
advanced.
рыцарь, у меня собралась скоро прайм, и я попросил призрака, чтобы он мне аугменты для куры притащил. Правда, я не знаю, когда у него их забирать. Конечно, идеально было бы после стрима.
So I'm just gonna merge it across, which again you do by going to the top left hand corner, click and drag across until it merges. Okay, so there's this big part at the bottom here. This is our geometry nodes editor. You want to click on new. Aha. So when you do this, you will notice that yes, we've now got a node editor here to play with. But also in the right hand side on the modifier stack, you can see that we've got this new modifier here for geometry
У
nodes.
меня
So
меридиан на
in order
3.
to use geometry nodes, it is a modifier.
Блин,
You
жаль.
will only see what is displayed here in your geometry nodes on the select.
Придется тогда либо за платину покупать у других игроков, либо меридиан качать. У меня меридиан тоже на 3.
If you've ever lost the geometry nodes, you're like, how do I, what happened? It used to be, it just click the modifier. If you click the little pin button, that will ensure that it will always be there. So if you click off it, it doesn't matter. So if you've only got one system, I usually just click the little pin icon and it just makes it easier. Anyways, so similar to our shader, right? It works left to right. But what is interesting in this case is that we've got an input. Okay, we've got the geometry, and then that is being fed over to the right-hand side to the geometry output. Okay. The reason for that is that we've got mesh to start with. We've got all of this mesh info. So it's saying take this geometry data and then put that out over here, and then that is going to be the resulting mesh. So whatever we put in this middle section here is going to result in the output mesh. As a very, very basic example, I'm just going to type in, I can't actually remember. There's so many nodes, it's hard to remember where they are, but I'll just say set position. So I'll put this in here, and then let's offset this by 5 centimeters. Okay, so I have taken my icing, which is still there. The mesh, the original mesh data is what it started with, and then it changed its position, moved it up 5 centimeters, and now it's outputted there. Okay, so I mean,
сколько можно уже бомбить на этот Railjack? Он уже скоро заплачет.
This value, I could make this value be driven by something else. You can see how the possibilities. Maybe it's pretty cool.
Баги, да.
Right.
Баги я знаю.
So we want to scatter something over our mesh, and if you hit Shift A or just go to Add, you'll see a whole string of different things here. And look, learning them one by one, I think that's the wrong way to learn things, in my opinion. I think it's best to follow tutorials, see what it is you're trying to do, and then just pick up the nodes as you go, and you'll eventually have learned so much that it's like you've learned them one by one, but you'll have actually got some context for where it's actually used. So the one that you're looking for in this case is underneath point, distribute points on faces. Okay, so if I select that,
Да что ж такое вы?
Ебать, конишь начало ночной смены.
Приходится из-за вас маты разрешать в чате.
Actually see like a big point, a big dot appearing. But if you don't, in this case we've got 0, it is actually creating points on our icing, but the density is so low
Уже
for
скорую
the scale
помощь
of our donut
вызывают
that we're not seeing
человеку.
it. If I increased my density, I would see we've got points. Now the reason these points are so ginormous is that we're working on a 10 centimeter scale for our donut, and so it's created really, really large points. I would hope at some point in the future, Blender has a display option for how big those points are, but for now it does not. You could change it with an extra node, but look, we don't need to because we're gonna add an object later on. But all this is to say is that it is actually there. Now, one thing you will notice is that our icing has actually disappeared. Okay, if you go into edit mode, it's still there, but in object mode, it is not. And that's because we said geometry input, convert it into points, and then that is going to be the geometry. We don't want that. We want our points and our geometry. So what you need to do is add in a geometry join geometry node, and you'll use that one all the time. We're going to take that, put that in there, and then take our output from our original mesh and then put that in there. So now we've got points as well as our original icing underneath it. Okay, so these points, as you can see, they're just blobs, and this is just a viewport representation of what it is. It's just like it's data that Blender is seeing. It's little tiny things that do not exist. If you were to render it, you would not actually see anything. You would just see your original donut because it's not using these points anywhere. So what we need to do is we need to, well, first of all, we need to have an object for this to replace our points. So let's set our density to 0 just so that we can actually not see those ginormous points blocking our view. And we want to model the object that we want to be placed on our icing there, which is a sprinkle, and there's various types of sprinkles. We're going to go for the most common one, which is based off a what shape? A cylinder. So Shift A, I'm going to add in, this is a new object that's not in edit mode or anything like that. New object, cylinder. Now when you do that, again, scale of Blender, thinks we're working at like 10 meters scale or something. We can just turn that all the way down to its like absolute smallest size, to like down here, and it's like almost the right size, but yeah. And then the vertex count, because this is going to be scattered all over our donut. You can see the number of like faces on there. It's quite a lot. That's a very detailed singular sprinkle. We don't need that much, so I'm going to set that to instead 8. All right. So now I've got that. Let's just move this to the side here. Move this up. And I'm just going to increase the scale of the x-axis, sorry, the z-axis, so SZ, just so that I can just roughly get about the size of the sprinkle.
Так, хорошо. Давайте проделаем что-то подобное. Пу-пу-пу-пу-пу-пу. Вот так. Может, пожалуйста, ручек на 1.11 снова? Зачем ты мне это еще раз отправил, если я тебе вопрос задал на этот счет? Так.
Это не я.
Написано же Сэнден. Задеванил.
Я не отправлял донат, это ошибка.
Странно. Ну хорошо. В общем-то,
Липсики.
нам нужен цилиндр. Восемь вершин. Радиус. Какой-то он очень большой. Ну так. Это будет у нас Sprinkle 1. Да что ж тебе? Так. Какая-то она маленькая, что ли? Не знаю. Ну пускай пока так, а там посмотрим.
And also just to scale it just S without any axes, just so that I can make it a little bit bigger. And that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now with my icing here selected, I am going to, between here and here, where it joins in, we're going to create our, we're going to start referencing this new cylinder as our sprinkle. So you'd think it would be under points, but it's actually under instances. So instances, this is a word, yeah, it's just under instances. We'll talk about it later. Under instances. And there's two here that I always get them confused. Instances on points or instances to points. And the one we're looking for is instance on points. And I always get them confused. It's, I don't know, I think they got to come up with a different name to like delineate properly. Yeah, it's I always click the wrong one. But we're creating points, and so therefore we want to put an instance, which is going to be an object that is like referenced fast, like it can like stream it essentially without loading in the data 1,000 times. That's what an instance is. Yeah, so we're putting that instance on our points. Okay, so we've got this node here, and now this instance, whatever we put in this instance is going to be our points, essentially. So if we were to actually select our cylinder up here in our outliner, and if we were to just drag this over to our geometry nodes thing, look what it does. It creates an object info node with our cylinder selected. Another way to access that would be underneath input object info right there if you happen to lose it. But that's a really short and easy way to just click, drag it across, and I've got it selected. And if I take the geometry from that and then put that into the instance of that, we won't see anything because our density is set to nothing, basically. Now you can see something's happening. We've got cylinders.
Так. Перетаскиваем сюда sprinkle. Добавляем. Вот где он это нашел? Наверное, instances. У него instance или instances? У него instance. Геометрия сюда. И теперь у нас ничего. А если мы увеличим плотность? Во. Отлично, у нас на пончике... У нас на пончике шестиугольники. Круто. Но я вообще хотел посыпку.
Little tiny cylinders appearing on our icing. Now, these cylinders are looking really short and stubby. What's going on? This comes back to that problem that if you watched the whole series from the start, you'll know that when you scale and do things, and when I was scaling this, what it did was it changed the scale of this object here. And that's kind of, it's not been applied to the object data yet, essentially. So what you need to do first is hit Control A and then apply scale. And now it's actually referencing the object correctly. Okay.
Ага. То есть мы хотим сделать так. Ctrl-A, масштаб. Но многого это не поменяло, но пускай так будет.
So far so good. It is rotating it though.
So far so good.
Yeah, upwards because that's how this cylinder looks. So I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis. So RX, and then you can see in the top left-hand corner, that'll actually give you the rotation amount. And I want to go for exactly minus 90 degrees. And you could actually type it in by hitting minus 90, and then you'll get that. Or another way is to just hold down Control and then it will snap it to the nearest 5-degree increments. So that's a way that you can rotate something to an exact axis, or an exact amount, basically. So now I've done that, nothing has changed, because again, we've now changed the rotation here, but it hasn't really applied to the object. So I need to apply it, Control A, rotation. Haha. Okay, so
Aha.
now something's happening. I'm going to increase the density here so that we can see more of our sprinkles, okay? Things are getting better, but you can see now we've got another problem where it's like it looks okay at the top, but down here it's now jutting into it like that. So that's because what we needed to do is to follow the rotation of these faces down here, not use this blanket value across the whole thing, but follow the rotation of the faces. So, and this is where, you know, a lot of people find geometry nodes is very complicated and complex, and it is. It does kind of change your workflow from being like a canvas tool, like an artist, to kind of thinking more mathematically. But what we've got here is distributing points. So we're creating points, and each of those points could have a rotation based on the face, right? So each of these individual points before them, with their little like blotchy shapes, they have a rotation applied to them. So if we took that rotation from the face and put that into here, which is our instances, now it's actually matching the
Oh.
rotation of the face. So it's kind of...
Смотрите-ка. Бум. Да, теперь они торчат оттуда. Поэтому это Rotate X. Вот так. Ctrl-A. Вращение. Во. Теперь наша посыпка лежит на глазури. В принципе, этого мы и добивались. Только, наверное, надо бы ее увеличить чуть-чуть. Во.
kind of wrapping around it, which is really cool. It's what we want. So let's increase our density here, and you have to use really high values here because we're working at such a small scale. So this density value, if you were making a, let's say like a grass or something across here, like working at like 2 meters, right? Let's say, or like a human scale, right? You would need to use far, far less, you know, maybe 50 if you want like 50 scattered rocks across here. It's essentially, what is it? It's density per meter. And because we're working at like 10 centimeters, a tenth of that, is like we have to really crank this up to get, you know, if we want 90 sprinkles on our donut or something, I guess we have to go 9,000, something like that. Anyways, we just have to use really, really large amounts. All right, now, once you start adding, once you get to, yeah, let's go 50,000. I'll show you how to make this easy. I'm just doing it progressively so you can understand things. But yeah, let's go 50,000. You can see that, okay, it's cool, but like, okay, now our rotation looks silly because it's following it like it's made of straw. It's like all combed into it. Whereas really we want each of these points to individually rotate, still apply to the face so they're not like jutting
Девочка,
out crazy,
квас был
but rotate
вкусным.
around it. So
Да,
between
квас
here
был
and here,
вкусным.
this rotation
Самое
value-
главное из холодильника, поэтому еще я
You're not to know,
прохладным.
you never guess what node to use. It's one of those things you can only learn from tutorials. But the node that we're looking for, Shift A, is underneath Utilities, and we're looking for Rotate Euler. Is that how you pronounce that word? Euler?
Euler. Euler.
Come on, no way.
Euler.
Wow.
Euler.
Вау.
Euler? Leonard Euler. All right, that is wow. That's why. All right, he's Swiss. Basil Swiss. All right, cool, man. Euler is how we're supposed to pronounce your name, but you're dead, so Euler is. I'm going with Euler. It makes more sense to me. It's got an E and a U and an L and an ER. Euler. No, Euler. Euler. All right. So we drop this in here, making sure it's in the rotation. And now we can tweak it. So if we hit rotate by and we just like, you know, rotate on one of these values here, you can see that we're rotating it on that specific axis. And look, we're getting some weird looking effects. Okay. The axis that we want to use is the Z axis because we're looking top down. So hit the little Z thing up there. We want to rotate along this axis. Okay. So if we just increase this, you would see that we're rotating it, but it's not actually on the right axis. Like something weird's going on. And that's because the by default base orientation is object, which I guess is the orientation of this object, but we want it to be local. And now it is local, I believe, to this sprinkle. That's my understanding of it. Whatever, could be wrong, but that's fine. Cool, so that's good. Now, you can see that we're rotating it, but it's on, they're all getting the exact same value. So we want to add basically randomness to this single value there. And the node for that, let me just move this up here so a little cleaner and easier to understand, is just type in search, and it is random value. This is one you will use all the time because it is very, very common when you're making something, you want to have random values for each new iteration or point or whatever. So this will generate a random value, and there's a number of ways to do it. The default is float, which means just basically a single number, and it'll give you something between 0 and 1, okay? Now, if I was to take this and put this into here, you can see that it is working. It's rotating each of those points on its own individual axes. But yeah, it's on all axes. So all the axes are getting a random value between 0 and 30. And it's not what we want. It's a little bit mashed up. So what we want to do is change it from float to vector. So vector, and this is where some people go like, oh, geometry nodes, it's too complex. I get it. Like vector, right? What is a vector? It's basically, it's 3 axes, okay? Your X, your Y, and your Z. Your X, your Y, and your Z. So it's just like this, 0 to 30, but we've got it for each individual axis, which is exactly what we want. So if we were to put this into here, rotate by, now it's generating on 0 to 1, but we can say not the X and not the Y axis, just the Z axis. All right, so it's working. Each point is getting their own individual rotation. It's adhering to the direction of the icing, but it's not fully rotated, right? Something's going on. That's because this value here. We need to increase this, and you'd think like 360, right? Because 360 degrees. And I was actually confused by this because it looks like, yeah, like it's already rotating like way more than, 360 degrees. This is actually a radian, like this is degree because it's got the little degree thing there. This is a radian value, which is, I guess like a single, it's like,
Выглядит
actually I
так,
spoke to
будто мы не
Arundel,
пончик,
who
а
is a
бибу
guy who
делаем.
really knows his geometry nodes.
Это
So
почему?
it's time to just ask him a load of questions.
Разве мой пончик похож на Бибу? Ух, очень много посыпки. Надо пока что сделать то, что там у него было. Это мы чуть сюда, чуть сюда. Так, у него там было свое вращение. Вращение. О, utilities. Rotate. Utilities. Random value. Вектор. Значение. Rotate by. Локально. И вот. Ага, оно не хочет сюда вставать. Ладно. Пум. Только нам нужно тут 0. 0. Пум. Ну вот они повернуты. А это уже похоже на ту посыпку, которую мы получаем, но не совсем.
Я не думаю, что мой ПК осилит 1.16.5.
М-м. Ну тогда как насчет 1.8? Ну просто... Ну я не знаю. выбрать старую версию, там не будет много нового. Но в принципе можно.
But basically, a radian, it's like pi, you know? In fact, if you type in pi, pi, you'll get the value, 3.142. That'll give you 180 degrees because it's like half the circle. This is where I like blanked out in math in class. I just like, all right, what do I need to do to like pass the test? but he evidently knows what he's talking about. It's double pi because it needs to be more than 180 needs to be 360. So it's double pi, I discovered, is
Я
tau,
посмотрю, что можно
T-A-U.
будет
If you type
сделать.
that in,
Правда,
it's double
1.8
pi.
же старше
And
предложенной
that's all
мной.
the value you need. Like, so basically, I mean, you don't have to remember, like, to type in tau.
Ну тогда как насчет 1.12? 1.12 компьютер потянет?
So that was all to explain that, yeah, basically why. Oh gosh, how many times am I gonna try? Yeah, I mean, that's all you need to know. Okay, so we got a random value. Good, it's working. Things are working. Great, cool.
Бум. Так будет правильней. Да, все это выглядит определенно запутанно.
Димочка, а что с пончиком? Почему он весь в костях?
Он не в костях, он в посыпке. Посыпке.
All right, the next thing to solve is how do we stop the sprinkles from appearing in places where
Это
they
посыпка.
should not, right? We don't want it on these globbity bits, and we also don't want it underneath the icing, which is what's happening. It's putting it on both axes. So what we need to do is do something called a weight paint. Okay, so if we select colors and hit Control Tab,
Выглядит так,
that
будто у
brings up
него
a pie
жадный
menu here for the
создатель.
different modes. So we've already used edit mode. We've already used
Дедерч.
sculpt mode before. Oh, I actually did it because I was
Удачного стрима,
practicing for
Дим.
this tutorial. I've
Доброй
already done it.
ночи.
When you do weight paint, it will
Спокойной
automatically
ночки.
add a vertex group to it.
Сладких
A
снов.
vertex group is it's basically like a value of between 0 and 1 for each individual point on your mesh. And you basically paint it in. Now it's covered in sprinkles right now, so I'm going to go to my modify stack. And as we learned before, this little button here will disable a modifier from your viewport only. And this one would disable it from your render, but yeah, just viewport, turn it off. Okay, so if I was to now just paint on here, whoops, by default it
Обнял и
would be this.
погладил.
Hey, why are you back again? It's painting what looks like a heat map, okay? So the way this works in weight paint, dark blue is a value of 0, red is a
Мой
value of 1,
милашка.
and then these other values are obviously leading up from there, like light blue.
Ну
then
почему я обязательно чей-то?
negative 1, okay.
Почему каждый хочет меня себе загробастать?
Дима, а что рыцарь покинул клан?
Нет, рыцарь не покидал клан.
On our sprinkles to go. Okay, so I'm going to change the size. Yeah, I'll change my weight paint. So that's Control F. Same hotkeys as before for texture paint and
Я тебя
sculpting.
просто
F,
тискаю и
just
люблю.
change the size of
Вот
your
и все
brush.
3.
And then Control F to
Приватизация
change
Димы.
the weight in this case.
Да вообще.
All right, so I don't want it on the
Все хотят
sides.
приватизировать Диму.
Here, like that. So just where it could logically actually appear. And the other thing I'll do, because this is where you sort of get a little bit artistic, but yeah, you don't want to have like constant values anywhere. So I'm just going to put
Хороший
use
семпой.
like single clicks to just say like no sprinkles here or less sprinkles, right? So I'm giving a lower strength value. And then I'll just do a few little, it just makes it, yeah, it just makes what you're creating look more interesting, and you've got something that is a little bit more unpredictable than what you would get normally. Okay, so once I finish weight painting, hit Control Tab again, and then go back to object mode. You could also just do it up here, by the way. Okay, let's turn on our geometry nodes. So how do I get that reflected on my mesh? How do I use that vertex group, which by the way, we might as well rename it. sprinkles density. How do I use that in my density right here? Now, I was asking Arundel about this. I imagine at some point there would be a node that you could reference the weight paint group. At the moment, this is the only way to do it. We drag this
Дима,
value
любите
into
ли
this
вы
blank
халаты?
input down here of our group input. Okay. Now, what this does, this is actually a really
Наверное.
handy thing, not just for this, but for anything. This is exposing a value. When we take something from here and we put it into one of these blank.
У меня просто дома нет халатов, я их не надеваю. Но когда, допустим, на технологию в школе мы надевали халат, это было прикольно.
So that I don't have to jump to my geometry nodes if I want to change the density of my sprinkles later on. I can just play with it right here without having to open up the full thing, right? Really, really handy. Next to it is a box, and this is the box that is important. It is the weight paint box, or the vertex group, or is it, maybe it's just any attribute. Anyways, you'll see that if I click that little thing, it changes from a number to basically a text field. And then you can reference different attributes of the object. The one that we're looking for, of course, is the one that we have called sprinkles density. All right, now when I did that, what exactly happened? Nothing. And that is because it has assigned a value of 0 to 1. Okay, whereas previously, before, we were using values of 50,000. So I would need to convert my 0 to 1 to a 50,000 thing, which I could do with a math node. Okay, so that was a utility, math. Set this to multiply, and then put this in here. And then if I added in 50,000, now I would get that only appearing where it needs to be.
Так, хорошо. В общем-то, в чем прикол?
Завтра во сколько на экзамен?
Завтра не экзамен, завтра еще один зачет по инженерии программного обеспечения. Он будет примерно в обед. Так что я завтра хотя бы посплю нормально. Точнее, проснусь нормально где-нибудь. Проснусь в 10 утра, сварю себе кофейку. Вот. Так, в общем-то, нам нужно нарисовать тут вес, где мы хотим, чтобы были наши посыпки. Наверное, сделаем кисть поменьше. Ох, оно подлагивает конкретно. Это, конечно, проблема. Что же оно так подлагивает? Да. Чуть-чуть еще подкрасим. И чуть-чуть внутри тоже. Так. Ну, можно еще чуть-чуть сюда. Сюда
Вы правда
чуток.
удалили весь старый сервер?
Я его не удалял, он сам удалился в течение определенного времени, потому что я его не использовал. Ну, вот так примерно. Пускай оно будет с небольшими пробелами. Так даже
А
артистичней.
что на нем было?
По сути, на нем был только один город. Один город, который состоял из многоэтажки, как такой общаги для всех. Был храм богу крови. Земет начинал строить еще какой-то дом. У меня была своя лаборатория на болоте. В подвале жил Юджин. было какое-то поле, мы хотели его застроить маленькими домиками, но пока не сложилось. Мы целую гору спилили под корень для того, чтобы на ее месте построить большой замок. Но замок так и не начали строить. Вот. И что-то у нас еще на болотах у нас был портал. Вот. Ну вот и все.
И все кончилось как?
Я не помню, как кончилось. Просто на него там заходило все меньше и меньше. Наверное, он удалился в тот момент, когда... Сервер, наверное, удалился в тот момент, когда я пропал из ютубинга на полгода. Я не знаю, что было с порталом в ад. С ним было все нормально. Так. Группа. Так. Sprinkles points. Вот. Теперь посмотрим, можно ли как-нибудь достать это оттуда. Цвет. Кривая. Материал, mesh. Ладно, сделаем то, как сделал он. А именно плотность мы сюда. А где?
Прошлый сервер был на такой же версии.
Прошлый сервер был на 1.16.5. Как он это сделал? Вопрос. И опять что-то не работает с гайда.
I'll have to change the yeah, dig, but oh, sprinkle. I'll just do what you're creating, what you would get. Well, you could also just do it up here, by the way. Reflected on my map. Sprinkles density. How do I use that in my density right here? Now, I was asking Arundel about this. I imagine at some point there would be a node that you could reference the weight paint group. At the moment, this is the only way to do it. We drag this value into this blank input down here of our group input, okay? Now what this does, this is actually a really handy thing, not just for this, but for anything. This is also doing is it's putting that value over here in your modifier stack. So
Гайд
now
сложный,
I've got
не для
access
простого
to
ума.
that density value over here, so that I don't have to jump to my geometry nodes. If I want to change the density of my sprinkles later on, I can just play with it
Просто,
right here.
видимо, что-то я упустил из виду, и поэтому у меня не работает.
The full thing, right? Really, really handy. Next to it is a
Если бы
box.
гайд был
This is
сложный, я бы его...
It is the weight
Я бы над ним
box
долго
vertical
думал
vertex.
тогда.
Or is it, maybe it's just any attribute. Anyways,
У него
you'll see
сразу,
that
кстати, появилось.
Надо просто подумать.
Но у нас же есть группа вершины, правильно? По идее, я должен... Хм. Ой, извините. Странно. Ай. Может, ее переименовать надо с большой буквы. Нет. Моя профессия. Повар. Интересно, я могу просто вот так вот и сюда перетащить? Где? Где оно? У него оно просто появилось. А у меня оно просто не появилось. И что мне тогда делать? Может, я неправильно нарисовал вес? Я не знаю. Что не так с тобой? Почему? Может быть, в комментариях там что-нибудь написали. Э, Теперь понятно. Спасибо комментариям под видео. Осталось только добавить математику. Multiply 10 тысяч. Пом. Теперь посыпка только там, где мне нужно. Ну, почти. Оказывается, из-за того, что я отключил отображать модификатор во вьюпорте, у меня и не выбиралась вот эта вот группа точек. Я включил, и теперь она есть. Отлично. Круто. Замечательно. Ну что ж, хорошо, идем дальше.
If I click that little thing, it changes from a number to the. Now, when I did that, what exactly happened? Nothing. 30,000 thing, which I my density, right? It's like it's my exposed density of this thing. Oh, and it's also, yeah, I guess it's got a maximum. I mean, this is the other thing. Like, we're going to change this in a second, because there's another problem that we've now got. Okay, so it looks cool, but how do we stop the clipping? Clipping. Each of these sprinkles is intersecting with other sprinkles. How on earth can we fix it? Well, we couldn't previously with particle nodes. We were just out of luck. We would have to just play with this seed value. The seed value, by the way, if you're not aware, it's like it's just a single value that it's infinite variations. So if you don't like the orientation, the distribution, you could just hit this until you find something that you like. And that was my advice for the previous particle nodes. And it will still be my advice, but there is something that will help us right here. This is the first instance where we've got an advantage over particles. It's not just random distribution, but something called Poisson disk distribution. Poisson. There's no W in it, but I was told that that's how you say it. I guess it's French. When we use this, okay, first of all, we've lost something, okay? We've got some new, so let's just talk about this a little bit. Okay, so we've got, by default, it'll be set to 0, and the density max is probably set to, I think, 10. That's probably what yours is. But if we set this to 50,000, it is now identical to the random distribution, okay? So random, Poisson disk, density max is the exact same thing as your density value. What Poisson disk gives us as an addition is something called distance min. And the way this works is each of these points, right? Say that's a point right there. It's going to create a radius around it. So if I was to just increase this to something really small, because this is meters, so we're working on like 10 centimeter scale, it's going to create a radius around it. And then if there's a point inside that radius that's near this one, it's going to cancel that point. So it's going to delete that point. And then of course, obviously if I increase the size of my radius, it's now going to find more points and it's going to delete that point as well. So what I want to do is just keep increasing this until I'm using annotations. I turn that off. Until it starts to look plausible. Now the thing is it's still not perfect because it doesn't know the rotation of these points. It doesn't know what this object size is. All it knows is that there is a point there and it's creating
Ладно,
things and it's
Дима,
canceling out
раз
that
вам
point.
приятны VSP изменения в Майнкрафте, о которых я плакать хочу, то пусть я попробую как-то починить очень долгие загрузки.
But it doesn't know.
Ну, почему долгие загрузки? Думаешь, у тебя версия 1.12 будет сильно долго грузить по сравнению с 1.11?
Я про 1.16.5.
А, да. Можно и 1.12 так-то сделать. В целом. Чтобы, так сказать, поддержать старые компьютеры.
The rotation of it. So really, the only way to fix this would be for Blender to have something called circle packing or some sort of packing algorithm so it could read what the size of the objects are and then try to arrange them so that they're not intersecting. Currently, the two options we have with this method is to increase it to a really high amount so that even the 2 points couldn't touch each other end to end like that. But then it doesn't look realistic because the spacing is too big. So what I suggest is use something that is a little plausible. Like you've still got them pretty close together and you'll get rid of most of the clipping this way. But then the seed value, you want to change that until you got something that it's like there's not as much clipping. So my advice is still pretty similar to before, but at least it's better because we've got the radius. So it'll detect most of the clips and it'll get rid of it.
А может
But, you know,
1.13?
you want to find something that will not have as much intersection. But don't bother with that now because it's going to change.
Нет.
So
Нет.
what I want to do now is I want to, because I haven't, you can see we've still got we're not using the weight paint group anymore. So when you're using, if you're just using random, you would use this, the weight paint group, which as you might remember is this. So it's using our I hope this isn't too confusing. Sprinkles density vertex group. So if we wanted to use it in random mode, we would use that. But in Poisson disk, we want to instead put it into density factor, which is conveniently a value between 0 and 1. So we don't even need to do any multiplication or anything. It's now, this is our density, this is our weight paint group. So
Один 12.2.
Да, скорее всего она.
Фух, пронесло.
А это выглядит неплохо, скажу я вам. Посыпка почти не проходит сквозь друг друга. При этом она достаточно равномерно по поверхности рассыпана. Во. Чуть-чуть вариацию сменим, и я думаю, можно будет так оставить.
in fact, if we want to tidy this up, we could say, wait, paint, okay? And then this one, we will say, sprinkle density. Okay, and then sprinkle density is going to be driving our density max. So actually I actually like poison disc more because you get random, it just like puts it all into one thing and you have to do a bunch of nodes to mix it up. But poisson disc will give you these extra things. So it's a lot nicer. Cool, let's clean this up a little bit better actually.
Ты про что?
Now here's something
Каким
else
образом выносите скины?
Now,
Ну вот я, например, играю через T-Launcher. В T-Launcher есть своя, так сказать, система скинов. Или типа того. Ты там у них регистрируешься и можешь себе любой скин забубенить. Ну, я вот так пользуюсь.
you know, around 50,000 is what we want, but that's like, I want to be able to just click and drag, and it's really annoying to do it at such really high values. So what I like to do instead is add in a math node, put this in here, so it's for our sprinkle, nope, yes, sprinkle density, and I'm going to hit a multiply, just like we did before, but for 10,000. Oh no! I was supposed to, oh, okay, it didn't crash it, all right. But it multiplied this value, which is 50,000 roughly, by another 10,000, which is not good. I was supposed to first set this to 50 so that it wouldn't do an insanely high calculation. The reason it wasn't bananas over here was that density min was deleting most of them. So, by the way, it doesn't actually delete it, it just hides it. So you don't want to use, basically you want to set this to 0, get your density max amount, like here. You want to get this to something that is like reasonable, and then you use your distance min thing to get rid
Создадите
of the rest.
сегодня
So don't go like a
серверочек
crazy
перед
high amount,
окончанием стрима.
because you won't. It'll
Думаю,
just-
да. Думаю,
Right,
да.
so we are at around 30 minutes. In the next
Ну, правда, я
part,
никого
we're
пока
gonna
туда не
see
пущу,
more,
но создам,
random
да.
variations to our cylinders, making them look more realistic, and then assigning random colors to each of our individual sprinkles as well.
Ау.
So that'll be kind of like a part 2 of this sprinkles bit. So go ahead, click the video
Я
on the
так
middle of your screen
хочу
right
тут.
now, and I'll see you in the next part. So our donut
Так,
is
хочу тут.
В смысле на сервер, скорее создавать в честь вас города.
Да, я понял. Просто я это использовал как предлог, чтобы потусить. Так. Ну вот как раз сейчас стрима закончим,
Можно все-таки впустить.
потому что уже 3 часа. Вот. Мне еще надо на кухне убраться. Так что мы пока что останемся в итоге. Заодно сейчас отрендерим превьюшку для записи этого стрима. Так я тебя туда впущу, а мне же надо сначала спавн построить. Самолично.
А в чем смысл спавна?
Ну как зачем? Когда люди только появляются на сервере, нужно на них произвести первое впечатление. Поэтому если построить красивый спавн, то это первое впечатление будет хорошим. В этом и смысл.
Я испытываю стыд от спавнов.
Ну вот. А я построю не стыдный спавн. По крайней мере, постараюсь. Можно будет под это отдельный стрим выделить. Завтра, послезавтра.
Не стоит, пожалуйста, я ТСК хочу строить в честь вас.
Да я понял, что ты хочешь в честь меня строить города. Но сначала все-таки мне надо, во-первых, выбрать какой-нибудь сид. Во-вторых, я все-таки хочу сам немножко подготовить место для спавна.
Эх, опять ждать до послезавтра.
Referencing a
В общем-то, мы сегодня не так далеко продвинулись. Раз, два, 3 урока всего прошли. За 3 часа. Как мы так умудрились, я не знаю. Ну да ладно. Вот. Пойду я убираться, а потом буду отдыхать. Ну а вам я, пожалуй, пожелаю спокойной ночки. И увидеться скоро.
Я так ценю, что вы мой хозяин.
Ня. Вот. Ты сегодня пораньше ляж. Ляг. Ляж. Ляг. Ляг спать, да. Вот.
Привет. У меня 4 часа ночи.
Куриве 93. Хорошо.
Мне через 4 часа просыпаться.
Привет, Куриве. Как ты умудрился попасть под конец стрима? Я вот не знаю. Какая-то суперсила прям. Я тебя, конечно, укушу, но... Вот. Но мы уже просто стрим заканчиваем. Можешь потом запись посмотреть на YouTube-канале.
Человеку уважаемому повод не нужен.
Не, понятное дело, что повод для того, чтобы прийти на стрим, не нужен. Но просто обидно, что он пропустил предыдущие 3 часа и пришел только сейчас, когда мы уже заканчиваем. Вот. В любом случае, я и тебе тоже желаю спокойной ночи и увидеться как можно скорее. Завтра или послезавтра. Ну а пока что до встречи. Дня.
Девочка, пожалуйста, я так жду этого сервера.
Я знаю. Но подготовка должна быть выполнена.